Hey everyone, it's Melanie Johnson. Thanks for joining us today. We're here for another great podcast. All right, so if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're like a homemaker entrepreneur, you know what I mean? Like you're trying to make your life happier, less stressed. We're so stressed out today. We think we're making progress, we're doing the right thing. And even if you're successful, you're like, oh my gosh, am I really happy? Am I like living my best life ever? And a lot of people are saying no, and they're filled with anxiety and stress. So we have an expert on today, Aaron Marcum, right?
Markham.
Marcum.
Yeah.
I noticed that you have like a degree in the psychology, really, of being happy. I didn't even know there was such a degree. So we have an expert with us today, and we're going to dive into this so you can be happier and less stressed. Welcome, Aaron. Thanks for joining us today.
So good to be here. Thank you for having me, Melanie. And yeah, the Master of Applied Positive Psychology. So some people call it the happiness degree, but I can talk more about that and how it kind of, came about and what the history of that is. But it's all about how to flourish regardless of circumstance. Really is
Well, so
is
imagine just studying that. I mean, you got to be a happy person just every day. You're studying how to be more every day. You're learning more things of how to be happy. Well, tell us,
right.
how did you decide? I mean, at a young age when you were going into college, that this was going to be your major and then turn that into a business?
Well, interesting. I didn't actually go through the master's program until more recently. I actually went in at about age 49. And so this was my journey is an interesting journey. So I started my first business in 2002. It was a home care agency.
Hmm.
And it's an emotional kind of business where I was taking care of elderly and I had nurses and aides and so forth. And sometimes emotionally exhausting, a lot of burnout in the healthcare space.
Hmm.
And so I've gone through my entrepreneurial journey not super happy, right? I think naturally I'm a fairly optimistic person, but even the greatest optimist can deal with burnout and deal with stress and financial stress and all the different things that come in an entrepreneurial journey. And so fast forward 20 years, I've started several businesses, had some pretty good, I guess, from a worldly standpoint, success.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until about 2015 that I realized that my professional flourishing it was really good. I was a successful businessman, but I was living what I call, and I write this in my book, the lie of the either or. And I felt like that either my personal flourishing, or I could flourish personally, or I could flourish professionally, but I couldn't have both.
Hmm.
So, as most entrepreneurs, I put everything into my professional flourishing, thinking that my personal side would eventually catch up with itself, which is a total lie. It just doesn't happen that way. You have to invest, you have to really focus on it. And again, in 2015, I really started focusing on it. And by that time, very well known in the healthcare, home care space, I had created a company that measured data analytics for the entire industry and was speaking all over the country and having some measurable success from a worldly standpoint. But I was struggling. I mean, honestly, my health was struggling. I was burning out on many levels. My relationships, my kids. I have 6 kids,
Oh
so
my
a
God.
handful, right? Wonderful kids. And so all of that was kind of, and been married for quite a few years. I've been married to my sweetheart Heather for 27 years now. But again, my relationship with her was struggling. And so when I really decided that if I put the investment in my personal flourishing side, if I start pursuing other passions and not becoming so obsessively passionate about my business, I learned that my business would thrive as a result. And that's exactly what happened. 2016, I got into cycling. You can see some of the cycling medals behind me and started pursuing other things. And then I sold my business. There's a lot I mean, this podcast isn't 2 hours long, right? So sold my business and then applied to the top program in the world for positive psychology. Martin Seligman, he's a very well-known psychologist in the positive psychology. He's the father of positive psychology. He started that program. And I went into it with the absolute goal of helping other entrepreneurs flourish. For several years since 2016, I had found that in myself and I wanted to help others, but I also wanted to understand how. Like, what's the science behind this? So think of positive psychology as the science of well-being. And so I went all into that, and that's where the book is coming from in growing successful businesses, but also growing not a perfect life. I struggle like everyone else, but feel like my personal flourishing side has really come and caught up to my professional flourishing.
I love what you're saying. So first of all, you did a transition in midlife, which that's a
Yeah.
whole other conversation in
Oh
itself.
yeah.
How to do that transition, to take that pause, maybe not
Kind of
having
reinvent
it.
yourself almost.
Yeah, you're reinventing yourself, but you learned along the way to reinvent yourself by starting with yourself first. You have to do the work on you to make sure you're in a good space so you can be successful
Right.
doing that. And I think that's a lesson. Another point that you really made is really it's an ongoing battle. I shouldn't say it's not I shouldn't use the word battle. It's just an ongoing journey.
Well, sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's brutal.
Yeah. Sometimes you wake up in the morning, you're like, I don't want to work on myself. I don't want to do things. I'll just be
Yeah.
miserable for today. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's okay too. So you found these different ways to do this. You've got like an 8-step system. Kind of take us through one step at a time. And I may have some questions along the way as you're
Sure.
explaining the 8 steps.
Yeah. So yeah, I call them the 8 laws of entrepreneurial flourishing. And it's really, it does focus a lot on the personal side of flourishing for entrepreneurs. And there's some great, more and more science-backed evidence specific to entrepreneurs because of our drive and certain elements that entrepreneurs have that maybe
Mhm.
the general population may not have as much. It's just we're just different. We're wired differently a lot of times. So big risk takers, right? But with that comes a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And so the first one is what we call Entreclarity. That's the first law.
Hmm.
And that's getting very clear on what we call the guiding truths. I've had my guiding truths for years. They've helped pick myself up. In 2015, it was my guiding truths that got me through it. And really, my guiding truths have been I haven't really changed them in 15 years. And it's really been kind of my direction. Now I lost though. Even though I had them, I lost sight of them from about 2010 to about 2015
Oh.
is I just got disconnected from those.
Hmm.
So focused, obsessively passionate about my business and because I knew we were changing lives, but I was also letting my own life suffer. So that entre clarity, getting clear on that. And then we also in that law, we talk about breakaways. It's a cycling term, a Tour de France term, where you break away from your former self and you kind of go lean into these guiding truths and figure out how to make these truths true for you. For example, one of my 8 guiding truths is my mind is at peace. Another one's my family receives of my time. Another one is my hands provide service. And I have these kind of guiding truths that are just kind of interweave, my own life. They're just very much a part of me that I want to be true about me at all times. And so I have to come back to those. The second law is create. So the creation. If entrepreneurs are not creating, their well-being suffers. There's a lot of science behind this. And so if they're always in their business and they're not taking time for themselves, I call them deep thrive sessions where you're going all in to kind of your own self-development 2 or 3 times a week. I talk more about this in the book and how to kind of go into that with a real intention. You're
Yeah.
not necessarily working on your business, you're just working on yourself and you're thriving, and it's this kind of deep focus. Early in the mornings is typically when you do these deep thrive sessions, but that's an opportunity for you to create a better life and making sure you're taking care of yourself. So creation, very important. Also creation at work, making sure you're creating space at work to create. And so that's the second law. The third law
Before you
is
get into
yeah, go
before
ahead.
you get to the third one, the second one, so when you're saying create, it's really when you're saying you're going deep, it's more of a thought creation versus like, I'm going to go make a painting or I'm going to, make something creative or artistic or learn a new skill. It's more of an evaluation of yourself, is what you're saying.
It could be both,
Mhm.
right? Is that both are creative, very powerful exercises. Is that if you are artistic, leaning into that, if that's a personal hobby or something you're doing, then that could also generate some creative thought. But
Yeah.
also, it always leads with creative thought. Like in those creative periods, is that first thinking, planning it in your mind of what you want to create,
Mhm.
It could even be planning a family trip, and creating that and really thinking through how you're going to make those real connections with your kids on those trips, that kind of thing. So it could include both, but it always includes the mindset of
Okay.
creation. So yeah. Third is grit. Grit, super important for entrepreneurs. I go through these 5 levels of grit. And the first level is curiosity. Like when we first think about our entrepreneurial adventure, we're curious about it. We're like, that might be a good thing that I could pursue. The second level is interest. That's the research level. That's where we're kind of going a little deeper into whatever that is.
Mhm.
The third level is practice, which is the level that many entrepreneurs skip, is real understanding that passion for something you're doing typically doesn't happen until we practiced it for a while.
Mhm.
Like sometimes we expect that passion just to kind of fall in our lap, and that can affect you're fine. That could affect our staying power if we don't practice it enough. So that's the third level. I really go into that. It's really important. Angela Duckworth in her book, Grit, talks about practice as well. And then the fourth is passion. It's the one that we know that we hear about, passion for what you do, your why, all of those things. But if we skip those first 3 levels, our staying power and really passion cannot be developed fully.
Yeah.
And so that fourth level is really important. But a lot of people don't realize there's a fifth level beyond passion, is that as soon as you are passionate and you practice it and you're really into it, then calling is the fifth level. And the calling is the impact you want to make. Whatever you're creating with your business, again, going back to that second law, whatever you're creating, if you feel called to it, your staying power and your grit just deepens even further. And then you have to be careful. I talk about in the book, the harmonious versus the obsessive passion, is make sure that you also have other things you're passionate about, that you're pursuing, hobbies, cycling in my case, and so forth. And so that's the third. I know for time, I'll hurry through these. The fourth one is connections, entre connections. That's your relationships. It's the number one reason or the number one impact to well-being is our relationships.
Mhm.
And so I go deep into the 3 different levels of relationships or how to foster better relationships. One is being congruent with yourself. How you are in public is also how you are in private. If
Mhm.
you're not, your relationships suffer, in that sense. The second is being present. We hear that a lot, but I go about, when you're home, let's say you're starting a new venture and you have to put 70, 80% of your time into the new venture, but at least that 20% that you're at home, be there at home, be present. And I go deep into that.
And with
And the
social
third
media,
level of that is these high quality connections, making sure that every day you're having these, what Jane Dutton, organizational psychologist, calls high quality connections. We're having those little impacts on individuals. And I go into how you create those high quality connections every day.
and
And then entre habits is the fifth one, creating those positive habits, dynamic positive habits is what I call them every day. It's the unconscious habits that make the biggest difference. I go into character strengths in that law as far as like the virtuous strengths that we should be creating with our habits. Super powerful concept on creating good, solid entrepreneurial habits that help us develop better character in our lives and better character strengths. That's a positive psychology term that Chris Peterson and Martin Seligman have developed over the years. The seventh one is that's the health and vitality, of course. That's also mind and body.
Mhm.
It's like investing in both and making sure your mind, as Joe Dispenza calls, is really in charge, of your body and controlling that. And it's all about mindset. And then the eighth one is agency, entre agency. It's like not blaming others. It's really leaning into owning our outcomes and our imagination. I go deep into these 3 levels that Martin Seligman has talked about when it comes to agency. But agency is I call it the keystone of all the 8 laws, is because it's just pivotal to everything else, kind of wraps everything else. And so all these 8 laws lead to what Aristotle calls the good life. It's the complete life. It's the full life. It's not a life without challenges, but it's a life where we can flourish regardless of circumstances or challenges that might be going on. And so that's the whole premise of the book.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking about, you were talking about being present. And today it is so hard with social media, and we're attached to our phone that we might be in the room, but we're checking our email, we're looking at Instagram, we're bored. So we're not
Yeah.
necessarily present. And I notice this is with my kids a lot, that not my generation as much as the younger generation.
Yeah.
It's a constant battle. I
Oh,
don't know.
it's huge. We're just bombarded. But it's also like for me, for years, even before all that technology, early on in my, when my kids were younger and so forth, so they would be talking to me and my mind is on my business. That's the case for many entrepreneurs. Even if they don't have a phone in front of them, is our mind can be elsewhere. And
Yeah.
so being just there, being mindful, self-aware, there's a big
Mhm.
factor to that. So
And then what are some keys of making some of these habits? You talked about, being unconscious habits of being conscious. It's like learning a stick shift. You have to be
yeah,
conscious of the brake and the moving of everything, and it's jinky when you
yeah,
start. How do you transition to make some of these habits to be unconscious, that they're automatic now? You're just doing them.
yeah. 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 You've got, of course, I'm not in the book. I don't repeat a lot of the atomic habits. There's great ways that Claire talks about making some of these things unconscious. But when I talk about unconscious habits, I'm really leaning into the character strengths.
Mhm.
For example, creativity is a character strength, self-regulation is a character strength. And by making those unconscious, where it just kind of runs in the background, we just do them, we have to make them conscious first. And we have to set up these like triggers and things that remind us to lean into those. For example, I am trying to foster a greater habit of my relationships with my kids. And so texting them every day, at least one of them every day is my goal, to see how they're doing and just kind of make that connection. Because I have 4 kids that have moved out of the house and they're living life as adults right now. And I want to make sure I'm connected. So I have a reminder on my little watch here that has triggered in the mornings, it triggers me to send a text. And after a while of doing that, I don't need that reminder anymore. It becomes unconscious, as like, it just is running in the background and I'm going to send a text, but it takes a while for us to create those kinds of habits. And so but eventually they're unconscious. 43% of everything we do in life, according to Wendy Wood, Good Habits, Bad Habits book, and all the research that she's done, is that 43% of everything we do is unconscious. And
Nice.
so if we can create character strengths that are unconscious, just think about the type of people we become when so much of the good that we do just kind of runs automatically within ourselves. And I talk more about that in the book. But yeah,
You have to have the patience, right? To start with the unconscious, get it to be a routine. It's like going to the gym, and you can't expect
yeah,
the muscle to happen overnight.
yeah. Start
And
with the conscious and then, yeah, you move into the unconscious after a
then get
while.
there.
But
Because some
the
people
gym's
give
a
up.
perfect example. Like
Yeah.
that has to be running eventually, hopefully running into the background. I have a couple of my daughters who started that way, very conscious about their health and wellness. And now I just feel like they just run this. In fact, all 4 of my oldest are very aware of their health. They kind of inspire me, but they really run these kind of patterns, the gym patterns in the
Yeah.
background. And my son is always in the gym, it seems like. So
Yeah.
I
It
think you
takes
can
a
get
while.
there. Yeah.
So let me ask you one last thing is, out of all these 8 things, because it can be overwhelming, like when you
Yeah.
printed them all off, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. So where do you, even though I know you have an order that you did them in the book, where do you recommend someone to start, or how should they start? Should they just pick something from the book and start there, or should they go in order?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a process, especially the early ones. So Entreclarity to me is the first one you need to start with. Like really get clear on your guiding truths. When we launch the book at the end of January, we're also going to launch an AI tool or powered by AI where they can actually build out their guiding truths.
Mm.
And so for your listeners, if they go to entrethrive.com/elite expert, we actually created a unique URL. They can download what we call the Entreclarity guide.
Uh-huh.
And all the questions on the guiding truths are in that guide. And then we also have a tool called the breakaway tool that helps them also create their next breakaway. And so it's a great tool to start with, but those questions and the way we have the guide will also be powered by AI in the next by the time the book launches. And so that'll be exciting to be able to go there as well.
Terrific. Well, I was just going to ask you, where can people reach you and find you?
Yeah, entrethrive.com has all the contact information. Again, if they go /elite expert, download the free tool. And then up at the top is all our contact information on that site as well. We want to make sure that your listeners get that free tool, just for listening to this. So
Awesome. Appreciate
yeah.
it. Well, thanks, Aaron, for coming. You've been a great guest, and everyone step into your happier, less stress-free life by using the tools that Aaron supplied today, and definitely grab his book when it comes out. So if you're looking to become an author, a best-selling author, we guarantee you'll be bestseller when you work with Elite Online Publishing. Go to our author submission page, and we'll see you next time. Have an absolutely fabulous week, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Melanie.
Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.